Well, happy Monday, everybody. I just wanted to tell you guys a little bit of this. These are a sort of a mixed bag of stories about people and diagnostic situations and that kind of thing, and some of the stuff I learned, and and I just wanted to touch on these. Sort of upgraded this from a previous presentation I did about 5 years ago. But whenever I was dealing with these borrowers that would come by and get this stuff off of your workbench, like your gasket glue or something like that, the way that I would deal with that was I would take a nasty old oil can with the bottom cut out, and I would set it over that as camouflage. Somebody came by in there and saw a nasty oil can, they wouldn't touch it. And so I could just, when nobody was looking, I could pick up the nasty oil can, use my gasket glue, put it back, in other words, put the gasket glue back and cover it back up with the oil can. Sometimes people would come and say, "Can I borrow your gasket glue?" I'd make them turn around so they couldn't see where I put it, and then I would let them borrow it, but I'd say, make sure you bring it back. But anyway, that's back when we were using these round oil cans like this one right here, and that went away. They started making round oil bottles, and they started making square oil bottles and all that. But one way or another, those round oil cans were pretty good for that, and you used those for many, many years before the plastic ones came out. But anyway, that gasket glue was something that you always had to go get another one because somebody was always running off with your gasket glue. Strategy number two, they'd run off with your carburetor spray. And what I would basically do to stop them from doing that was I would make a fake label that said liquid manure. If they walked by and saw that, they didn't know what that was, and they wouldn't pick it up and spray it and smell of it or try to look under the label. They would just let it sit there and go find somebody else's gasket glue to steal. But I wanted to follow up here. I don't know if I mentioned this on here before or not. I think I've posted it on my Technical Writer Facebook page. But the used car guy was always cleaning stuff with carburetor spray. He started getting sores around his mouth. I mean, just ugly, nasty sores. He went to the doctor. Of course, the doctor said, "Well, you're allergic to something, don't know what." And I noticed that every time he was cleaning parts that he would hold in his hand, he'd just hold it in his bare hand and he'd spray that. I'm talking about all day, every day, he was spraying that carburetor cleaner on his skin. And I said, "Well, if you'll stop doing that, I bet you those sores around your mouth will go away." And I said, "If you got to do it, lay it on a shop rag and spray it." Because there wasn't any nitrile gloves back then, or they were, hard to come by. Now you can buy them everywhere. So that guy stopped using that carburetor spray on his hands, and all of that sores around his mouth went away. People at the doctor didn't know what to do about it, but he didn't give them all the information they needed either, and they didn't ask the right questions. But there was another guy, whenever he finally moved on, he got a different job, they got promoted or something. Another guy started doing that same job that he was doing, and he started getting sores around his mouth. And I noticed he was spraying carburetor spray all over his hands. But anyway, try to keep this stuff off your hands because it gets into your bloodstream, and your bloodstream, your body tries to get rid of it through the thinnest places on your body, and that's like going to be around your mouth and stuff like that. And it causes sores and lesions and stuff. So don't spray a lot of that stuff on your hands. I mean, I washed parts in mineral spirits and gasoline for 20 years. But this stuff here, for some strange reason, seems to do worse. Mineral spirits was pretty bad too if you didn't put some automatic transmission fluid in it. Well, this guy here, transmission mechanic, had been there a long time. I said, "How do you unhook these lines on these new 85 Fords?" He said, "There's a special tool." And it was this tool right here. And so I used it once, and the tool truck came, and I said, "Do you have one of these tools?" He said, "Oh yeah, I got that. It's $11. Bought it from the Cornwell guy." And I told Billy, the transmission guy, I said, "I've got one of these, so I don't need to borrow that one anymore." And so Billy lost the one that belonged to the shop and started borrowing mine. Well, that irritates me a little bit, so to get rid of the irritation, I gave him the one I bought for $11 and bought me another one for $11. I'll be doggone if he didn't lose the one I gave him and came back borrowing the other one I had. He wanted me to be his, tool man, I guess. And he's not the only guy that I've ever seen do stuff like that. One time this BG chemical guy gave me and the other drivability mechanic at the time these really, really nice heavy-duty yellow transmission funnels that were long and real easy, good funnels, really good And it was just because we were using so much of the stuff he, in our work, the BG chemicals. Anyway, he said, the guy that also got another one just like I got came and borrowed my funnel. I said, what happened to your funnel? He gave you one too. He said, oh, I took mine to the house. He took it home and now he wants to borrow mine. That sort of stuff just drives me nuts. Another guy borrowed an ignition module I always like to use for a test, with one of them old Duraspark modules. And he brought back a different one that had green overspray paint on it. It didn't even look like the same brand. And he basically put my good test module on a vehicle and gave me the crappy old bad one back. And I had sort of a little bit of a shouting match with him about that, and he swore up and down, no, that's the one I borrowed from you. You know how those people are. They give you back something that's different than what you, like they think you're stupid, Well, this has been, my buddy's over here, this guy's a service writer, and that's me, and this is Little Mark and Big Mark. And we all work together about the same time. You remember some of these things. And the shop was laid out like this. There was 25 mechanics in there. And Little Mark worked here, Little Short Mark. And this is my two service bays. Big Mark worked here. There's a door in the end of the building that was an electric door that you'd push a button and raise it up. These were manual roll-up doors all along here. And back in this area was the truck shop, where the big heavy duty, semis got worked on and all. Well, one day my buddy Donnie, he's not listed here because he wasn't here then. I came in the back door on a tempo, and the guy that worked in these two service bays right here, his name was Bobby, older man, white hair, and he was cold-natured, and it was wintertime. And Bobby figured that he saw me come in, he figured he would do me a favor and close the door for me so that he wouldn't have to wait till I got out to close the door. Well, I wasn't going to close the door because Donnie was coming in behind me on a bucket truck. Well, Bobby started the door closing, didn't know Donnie was coming. Donnie runs into that door when it's coming down on his bucket truck and just made a big mess, all because Bobby wanted to go close the door without looking to see if somebody was coming in. Well, okay, Mark had been listening to a particular radio station that I didn't mind very much. One day he puts it on a loud music on a hard head-banging rock station I absolutely could not stand. You know how it grates on your nerves and it's loud and it's in the other guy's service bay and all. So I go over to Mark and I say, Mark, change that radio station back to the one that you had because that radio station is really, really getting on my nerves. And he says, and so he bows up and he says, I like that radio station and I'm not, changing the station. And it was wintertime, still cold. And so I'm hot-natured anyway. I can walk outside without a coat when a lot of people are bundled up, because I'm just hot-natured anyhow. So I raised both of my service bay doors, and of course he's working right in this area right here. And he's over there, and he's all bundled up in his coat and shivering, and he comes over here and he tells me, close those doors, man, it's cold in here. And I took the same tack he did. I says, I like those doors up, and I'm not putting them down. And he got the message, and he tried to work with those doors up for a while just so he could keep listening to his music. Finally, he comes over there with his veins bulging out under his neck, yelling at me with his face red, and he says, okay, I'll change the radio station, but it's not because you've got those doors up. Now put those doors down. I still get tickled thinking about that. One day, I was standing there talking to a bunch of guys, and I said, I'm going to throw this balled up shop rag, and I'm going to hit the shop foreman in the back of the head with it. And the shop foreman was walking along here checking all these doors to make sure they were locked. It was at the end of the day anyway. I threw that thing, and it cleared all of the pipes and all of the wires and all that kind of stuff in the upper part of the building, and didn't hit a single one of them. I figured it was going to bounce off of something before it got to him, and it bounced right off the back of his head. Another time, I pulled a vehicle up out here to work on it because my service bays were full and all I needed to do was work on turn signals. Donnie, this was later on, was over here in front of this service bay, which there were computers here along the wall where we looked up stuff, shop manual stuff. And I was way out here, and there was a trash can here. And I threw that turn signal flasher at the trash can. But right as I got ready to throw it, my eyes shifted to the back of Donnie's head, and I'm thinking, man, I sure hope I don't hit Donnie in the back of the head with this. That thing sailed over and bounced right off the back of his head, and I had to apologize and I say I was sorry and all that. But it's like hitting your finger with a hammer. If you look at your thumb next to that nail you're driving, you're going to hit your thumb. So don't look at your thumb while you're driving a nail, and don't look at somebody's head if you're throwing something at the trash can. Mark had this rat that appeared under the hood of a Bronco 2 he was working on the service lot. And he jumped back and it startled him. And Philip Kirkland didn't even know this had happened. But Mark, after he felt like the rat was gone, he was reaching way down in this area. And he was doing something to the oxygen sensor ground. I don't know what he was reaching down there for, but he had his hand down there. And Philip Kirkland came walking by this side, saw his hand in there, reached in over the wheel well, crouched down, and touched Mark all over the hand. And Mark made strange noises and jerked his hand out of there and skinned his hand because he thought the rat had done got him. Another time, somebody pulled a Bronco 2 into Mark's service bay, and you could see smoke coming from under the edges of the hood, which was alarming. And whenever Mark opened the hood, there was nothing but a mass of roaring flame, and he let go of it and dropped it because it startled him so bad. Then he had to get him to open the hood again, and I don't know why that fire started under there, but it started when they was pulling it into the shop, But anyway, we used to occasionally see rats around there, great big rats too. As big as a squirrel, The shop foreman, Philip, was funny. He talked like Slim Pickens, came out of the 60s, and he'd get bored and like to go and argue. He didn't have. And one of the truck mechanics says the problem with these shop foremen, and there was another shop foreman at the time too, we had two for a while, he said the problem with these guys is they ain't got nothing to do. And he said they just want to start a conversation and then try to, make you do some extra work that doesn't need to be done. He was terrified of snakes. Somebody put a bag out there in the middle of the shop with a dead snake in it, just so somebody would come by and look at it. He pulled the bag open to see what was in it. It scared the daylights out of him, And he told me, he says, somebody might think that's funny. He says, but if I was driving a big truck down the road and something hit me on the foot while I was thinking about that, there was no telling what I'd do. But he was really funny. I'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute. These K-cars that we had a GTE contract to maintain all these K-cars, and most of their cars were these Chrysler K-cars. Some of you guys that are older probably remember these K-cars. They had a little four-cylinder engine in them, this funky carburetor here. And those things would get to the point to where the air conditioner would kick on, they'd idle really rough, and they'd either stall or try to stall. Every time that AC kicked on, they would idle really rough. And so we would work on those things and work. We didn't have any books on them. They weren't really, they had some sort of a rudimentary feedback fuel system on them, but it didn't do much. So anyway, we fought with them things. And the shop foreman, Philip, would always have to drive one when we were through working on it to make sure it was fixed. And I always wanted to hide my face or hide behind something when he came back, because I never was satisfied with the way those things ran, and nothing we did seemed to straighten them out. Now, sometimes we would have other repairs we'd have to do. Like one time I saw one that the choke spring had got weak, and it would pull the choke. Whenever you give it gas, it'd pull the choke open, and it'd catch it with a fast idle cam, and it would stall. All you needed to do is adjust that choke spring, make it a little tighter where it wouldn't do that. And he came over there and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm adjusting this choke spring." He says, "Well, you ain't going to fix that. The only problems we'd have with these is timing belt problems and carbon in the head." And I thought, only two problems, really? Vehicles can give more than two problems. But again, he came out of the 1960s, and that's what he was used to. When you found the one or two problems that a vehicle would give, most of the time you knew what was wrong with all of them. Talking about particular parts of the car. Well, I found out, full disclosure, I had gone to Chrysler school whenever we bought the Jeep franchise, and Chrysler and Jeep were joined at the hip after Renault sold out to Daimler Chrysler. And I talked to one of those mechanics up there. And, I talked to the instructor and all that, and nobody had any ideas. And one of them says, "Look, all you got to do to straighten that out is take that carburetor off there and flat file the bottom of it." He says, "You're probably going to find out it's got a kind of a little bit of it's a little warped, because it was a long, skinny carburetor base." And he says, "Okay." And so I said, I'm gonna keep that in mind." So I went back down there, And the next time I was monitoring the oxygen sensor, because this was a feedback carburetor system, and I noticed when the air conditioner kicked on, the oxygen sensor would go lean. And I got a little bit of carburetor spray with the tube on it, and as soon as I saw it trying to go lean, I'd just shoot a little bit right at that carburetor gasket. You couldn't tell that there was anything wrong with it, but whenever I did that, the oxygen sensor would recover and it wouldn't stumble. So I pull that thing off. You get all the gas out of the carburetor first. You got to gently kind of blow it out and dry it out really good, because if you turn a carburetor upside down that's got gas in the bowl, there's going to be all kind of sediment that's going to get up in everything, and then you're going to have a big problem. So I dried the thing out with air real gently, and then I flipped it over and I flat filed the bottom, and you could tell both ends of that thing were, you know, higher than the middle. And when I got through flat filing it, you got to be really careful, and you got to have good practice to do that. Good control. Put that thing back on there, that whole problem was gone. And we had fought with that thing for 2 or 3 years trying to figure those cars out. And not long after that, the contract went away. And the shop foreman actually told me, he says, we've never seen them run any better than they do when you do that filing. That fixes just about everything that's wrong the way the thing runs. Well, this Power Stroke diesel was a hard start. It'd spin, finally start up. Well, one of the first things I would check is the fuel pressure. Is that a special adapter, a little elbow-shaped adapter you put on there. And I would check that fuel pressure, and the fuel pressure on this one was down here around 20 psi. It's supposed to be 55 to 80, but if it's up over 50, you're typically going to be okay. But it was starting hard because it had low fuel pressure. And you know, and there's on those Power Stroke diesels with those Huey injectors, it uses control oil pressure to drive those 7-to-1 pistons in there, and you know, pop the injectors and all that. But anyway, he had the pump replaced. I said, this thing needs a fuel pump, so he had one of the line mechanics replace the pump. Now that job only takes about 1 hour and 45 minutes at the most, and it pays about 6 hours in the book. But anyway, I didn't care. I was, you know, because of the way I was getting paid, I didn't care if he gave it to the other guy or not. So he gave it to the other guy, and after that it wouldn't start. I thought it was going to burn a starter up on that thing. It'd blow its white smoke all over the place. And it wouldn't start. It spin. It would start before you replace the fuel pump, but not after. Now that's a clue. So I says, he comes to me and he says, what do you suppose is the reason why this thing won't start? It's blowing white smoke everywhere. And I says, you're flooding it. Flooding it? What are you talking about? I says, you put too much fuel in there, you're flooding. You can't flood a diesel. And so he walks away. This is a shop foreman, boneheaded, because he never had any idea you could get too much fuel in the diesel and it wouldn't start. And so the deal was, you got this algorithm in the engine controller, and it basically, if it's hard to start, it kept using adaptive learning to raise the injector control pressure, which the maximum injector control pressure is like 3,750 pounds. Usually when you're starting it, when everything's normal, it'll go to like 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 pounds at the max. And so I went over there when he finally came back and asked me. He says, and I looked at the scan tool, and when we spun it over, that injector control pressure was going up over 3,000 pounds. And I said, okay, that's what the deal is. I didn't point it out to him. I said, Eddie, the guy that did, I said, pull both battery cables off. So he pulled one battery cable off each battery, and while we were talking, Philip says, tell me again how you could flood a diesel. And I said, well, it actually fires on heat. You put too much, you know, because of the compression heat, put too much fuel in there, you cool that down, and it doesn't ever light off, and it goes out the back. No, he was shaking his head. Fired up. After we put the battery cables back on, it fired up, and even after it fired up, he was still saying, no. Well, the proof's in the pudding. If it starts, you know. Well, this brand new Summit was surging. It came in, and they said they first started noticing it on the tachometer, just waggling back and forth. It would waggle, a little bit like that. And then it got to where they could feel it in the way the car ran. Well, I was fooling with that thing. I said, well, I'm going to clean the injectors, because it wasn't hard to do that with the machine we had. So I cleaned the injectors. Lo and behold, the problem went away for 2 days. Came back. I says, well, I mean, it went away because I cleaned the injectors. Maybe I need to put a different set on there. So I got injectors I borrowed from a new unit. Problem went away for another 2 days. Then it came back again. Well, I got this torque converter solenoid wire that was coming out of the engine controller, hooked an old dwell meter I had in my box from when I used to do points and condensers and all. And I could tell by that dwell meter, the way it was reacting to that torque converter, that the torque converter was a modulated torque converter. Now that was a brand new thing back then. You see it on just about every car with a lock-up torque converter now, but back then that was brand spanking new. At least I had never seen it give trouble. And so it turned out that they put the wrong transmission fluid in it when they built it new at the factory. And that was causing the modulated torque converter, when it was at about 50%, it wasn't slipping smoothly. It was kind of almost chattering, but not really. I'd seen, after this, I saw this on Taurus's. I saw it on an Eagle Talon that came in that we had replaced. Our transmission mechanic had done a transmission fluid change on it. He put the wrong fluid in and it was surging like that. And so what we did was we put the right kind of fluid in it, took care of it. My question was, and it never came back anymore after that, after we changed the transmission fluid, put ATF plus 4 in it or whatever Chrysler had. It has that friction modifier. You can smell the fluid and tell if it has that stinking friction modifier in it or not. But why did replacing the injectors cause it to stop surging for a couple of days? And when I talked to this Chrysler guy on the phone about it from down in New Orleans, he acted like it had something to do with adaptive learning. That's about the best you can do on something like that. Nobody can really answer why something does what it does. Well, this guy pulled his two-door F-150 into the ride-up here and said his radio kept playing when he turned off the key. So Mark went out there, and it turned out that this guy had a boom box behind the seat. When he leaned back, when he had turned it on, and it was on the same station. So he was hearing his boom box. He wasn't hearing the radio in the truck, but the boom box had such big fine speakers, it was reverberating through the truck. This guy came in on a Mustang on a non-static day. It was a warm, wet day where you don't usually have static, He says, this thing shocks me and my wife when we get out, and we get out of the vehicle, when we touch the door after we're standing on the ground, it shocks us. And I said, really? And so he demonstrated. He got out and he touched the door, and I could hear the pop when it shocked him. And I said, that's interesting. So I got in, got out, touched the door. It didn't shock me. So I said, I'll tell you what. I said, you get in and get out, and then I'll grab a hold of the door of the car, and you can touch me instead of the door of the car. And so when he did that, that spark that jumped out of him felt like 110,000 volts out of a qual pack. That was the hardest pop I've ever got from somebody just getting static. And I'm thinking, I don't know. I know some people used to have ground straps they'd put under their car that would drag on the pavement that supposedly prevent this kind of stuff. But I told him, I says, get some of that anti-static spray that you use for laundry. Is about the best thing I got to tell you, because I have no idea. If it's only shocking him and his wife, but it's not shocking me under the same circumstances, unless he's in the picture, it's got something to do with his dielectric constant or something. I don't know how to explain that. But I ain't never forgot how hard that hit me. I almost went to the ground. I mean, that spark must have jumped an inch, The shop foreman and me were test driving. My watch beeped on the hour, beep, and a police car comes over the hill. And he looks around, so he must have a radar detector in here. And I said, no, that's my watch. And he said, well, you got a radar detector on your watch? Well, it's 66 Mustang. Guy came in and wanted a really, really good tune-up. This is perfectly restored car. Looked like he had, everything had been done. It brand new everything in there. And he didn't say why he wanted a tune-up. This is always a red flag when the guy asks for a tune-up, but he doesn't tell you why. So you really need to ask the right questions. And the service advisor came and gave me the ticket and said, this guy wants to tune up and blah, blah. So I put points in, condenser and plugs and adjusted the carburetor, did all the stuff you did used to do in the olden days on the tune-up. Got it all just set, set the time and everything. And all the plug wires and plugs were brand new, but I went ahead and put plugs in it anyway. And so the guy, I test drove it. And of course, when you're test driving a car, a perfectly restored Mustang like one of these, you don't coon dog it. You drive it gently, normally, like you would if it was your car and you had spent a lot of time and money fixing it up. You're going to take it easy on it. Well, the guy comes back tells the shop foreman he's still got a problem. He never told us he had a problem before. He just said he wanted a tune-up. At 5,500 wide open throttle under load, it would misfire just a little bit. And so I pulled the Sun Air interrogator over there, I was the only one that ever used this big old ugly thing. It didn't have what you'd have a regular scope on it. It would just give you your readings, numbers on the screen, this particular one. And I saw that one of them, all of them were firing on about 5,000 volts. One of them was firing on 20,000, and it was because you know how you put the spark plug wire through that boot and snap it down in the distributor? The distributor caps that look like a pencil holder. Well, this guy, when he put the plug wires on, he didn't slide one of them far in enough to where it was snapped down in there. It was jumping about, 3/8 of an inch before it ever hit the plug wire. And that's why he had that misfire. And it was only a one-cylinder misfire under load at 5,500 RPM. And the shop foreman says, I can see why he didn't see it, because none of our people drive customers' cars like you're driving this one. And this guy says, well, that's the way I drive it. Well, he didn't tell us that either. If he had said, I'm feeling a misfire at 5,500 RPM when I've buried the bone and I'm trying to go, he didn't tell us any of that. He just said, I want a tune-up. And he figured we would find whatever was wrong with it. But that was really a interesting set of circumstances there. Well, that's all I got this time. This is 26 minutes worth of me rambling and telling stories and doing diagnostic stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you have a great week. Leave me a comment. Share it with your friends. Talk to you later.